And as we looked around the world to different ministers leading the way in a whole variety of countries, there's certainly one who stood out. How many ministers of anything, but ministers for the environment, do you know who have a doctorate in atmospheric physics? There aren't that many. Indeed, is there any other? I don't know. And not just any doctorate in atmospheric physics, but a doctorate from Oxford University. And I heard a little wry remark there that you wouldn't find one of them in our government, and that's probably true. So Maisa Rojas Corradi was a full professor, indeed, at the Universidad de Chile before becoming a minister in the Chilean government. And I think you'll agree, once you've heard her, that there are few people as equipped as Maisa to talk intelligently about these topics, because there's no doubting the scientific base, which, dare I say, sometimes there is when you're talking to certain ministers. She oversees the Chilean strategy on climate, biodiversity loss, and pollution. And she will have a 10-minute keynote, roughly, and then we will have a chat and a Q&A. So get your questions ready. Thank you, Maisa. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. I will do my best to try to stay in 10 minutes. Might be just a minute later. I wanted to share some thoughts about the challenges for a socio-ecological transition in Chile. Our planet is in danger. We are facing a triple crisis, not just one, but a triple one. I'm talking about climate change, loss of biodiversity, and pollution. And if we want to have a viable future, there's an urgency to address them with utmost urgency. And to address them together, because they are interlinked. And we want to make sure that solutions, for example, to the climate crisis do not deepen or make worse, for example, the biodiversity crisis. So it's very important to look at them together. Now, the consequences of climate change are very evident. They have been very evident this year. I heard last week at the UN say to the Prime Minister of Samoa, the storm is gaining strength, and I think that puts it very, very clearly. And it's certainly, this is going to be the warmest year on record, and it might also be that we're going to get very close or even reach 1.5, the Paris Agreement target. This means that in a 1.2 degree warming world, we are now seeing into the future and see how much of these extreme events will be the new future. And so Latin America has had many of these extreme events as well, and that high vulnerability contrasts quite a lot also with the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that the region emits. It's just 8.1% of the global emissions. But not only that, but the region of Latin America also depends a lot on the exploitation and exports of goods such as minerals and food, etc. So that puts an extra burden on the vulnerability because of the environmental degradation that many of those activities bring. The case of Chile is not strange to this. We have a couple of territories where heavy industry is concentrated that have put an unequal burden of environmental and social degradation to them. These are called so-called sacrifice zones. To the point that, and I'm going to read here, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in an exercise told us that environmental degradation affects the effective enjoyment of human rights. And groups of people who are already in a vulnerable situation might see their human rights violated with greater intensity in case of environmental damage. This is why states have the obligation to respect, protect, and guarantee autonomous rights to a healthy environment in accordance with the principle of equality and non-discrimination. So with this little background, the first idea that I would like to bring here is that the causes of environmental degradation, whose symptoms are climate change, loss of biodiversity, and pollution, are rooted in political, economic, and cultural inequalities. Much of them that also trigger violation of human rights. So, if we want to address this triple crisis, it is necessary to articulate incremental but also transformative action that respects the principle of climate and environmental justice. And here, the concept of environmental justice in all these dimensions, I'm talking about the costs and benefits of mitigation and adaptation should be equally allocated. This is distributive justice. The protection of the most vulnerable people. Here I'm talking about intra-generational justice, conservation of ecosystem, ecological justice, conserving the rights of the future generation. This is intergenerational justice, and also the inclusiveness, the right to participate in the decision-making, etc., that we call procedural justice. So in short, we need to transform our productive social and cultural system, and we have to do this without leaving anyone behind. And this is at the heart of what we call a socio-ecological just transition. So how are we going to do this? One very important instrument that we have since last year in Chile, it's a climate change law. In that law, we say we're going to be carbon neutral at the latest by 2050, and also resilience to the adverse effects of climate change. So the energy transition plays a very, very important part in this. Not just for decarbonization, but also by the closure of coal-fired power plants in this heavily polluted region. They can also transform and do this carbonization in a just way, and therefore help to halt environmental degradation in a broader scale. Our energy transition is very much based on renewable energy. Our goal is 80% of renewable energy in the electricity sector by 2030 and 100% by 2050. There's also a lot of interest in doing green hydrogen, etc. And this is part of our long-term strategy, and so who's going to pay for this? And the good part of the story is, so we had a report by the World Bank back in 2020 that said that actually this decarbonization path that Chile was going through is going to actually increase our GDP by 4.4%. So energy plays an important role. It has a lot of opportunities, not just economic opportunities, but also social opportunities if we do this right. Now, the transformation that we need to, so these concepts go further than just these regions that I mentioned at the beginning, where we have lots of environmental degradation and this so-called sacrifice zone. But this really has to make a change in all of the productive activities and forms of economic development that need to change, that are currently non-sustainable or bring inequality, and therefore the change, although gradual, but has to be decisive in the way we transport, we feed, we heat, and we build our city. We have talked in the panel before that all this transformation have to occur very quickly. And how do we do this? And what is very clear is that we need to achieve these changes very rapidly, and that requires more and better both public and private investment. Now, coming to the private investment part, the private sector is increasingly concerned about climate change. In their investment, they face a number of challenges, from the investment planning to productive adaptation to global efforts and the urgency of action, complying with new and stricter regulation. And I'm sure that the private sector understands that and also sees the benefit of a strong signal from the state through the law that you have here, the law that we have in Chile, to engage in this path. Here are a couple of examples that I'm not going to explain, but let me now tell you 5 things, and with this I finish, that we are doing back in Chile. So the first thing is planning. I mentioned our climate change law. This is sort of the structure. It has the high-level international instrument, NDC, long-term strategy. Then we have sectorial mitigation and adaptation plans, but also regional and communal action plans and watershed manage, everything combined with monitoring, reporting, and verification. In all of these elements and parts, the state plans, but it's the private sector that has to implement this. Second, circular economy. Reduce, reuse, and recycle material. It's a very important part of our development strategy, including we are having a law being discussed in Parliament now to avoid our organics to end up in landfills and thereby helping our methane emissions. So we have all of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, participation in collective initiatives. This is just one example of what we have back in Chile, but you know very well the Race to Zero and Race to Resilience, where we want to engage with non-state actors, right, so that they can help us to advance quicker in the negotiation than the negotiation with the states that usually are a big challenge, and they're really slow. Chile is also co-chairing something that Germany is leading, which is called the Climate Club. The aim of this is to decarbonize, industries that are difficult to decarbonize. So that's the aim, to concentrate on those industries like cement and steel, to decarbonize them. So that's very interesting work we're doing there as well. We need to also strengthen our norms and institutional arrangements. Back in Chile, I'm really happy that I managed to finish a very, very long discussion, 13 years of discussion in Parliament, to have a public service in charge of biodiversity and a number of regulations as well. And the fifth part is local plans in governance here for some of these territories, of what will happen to these territories, how do they see themselves once those, for example, coal-powered plants are going to shut down, how do the reconversion occur. So this is only the beginning. The road is long and needs political will. I think we have that. It needs financial access and active involvement from everybody. So the call to the private sector is urgent, but we're confident that we all understand that and that there's no other way to do this all together. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Maisa. Very interesting, sometimes controversial. I've got some questions, and others will too. But I wanted to start with the 5 things you are doing: planning, MRV, circular economy, participation, I think the Climate Club, and the norms institutions around biodiversity. And just, I can't help myself do this, I'm sorry, but compare and contrast to the 5 things Rishi Sunak is not doing. which is taxing meat, taxing flying, organising your rubbish into 7 bins, forcing you to car share, and forcing you to put expensive insulation on your house. I mean, the response from Twitter was, thank God Rishi stopped things that weren't happening. But there's a real question here, which is that you've set out 5, positive things. Does that play politically? Because what is playing politically in the UK is 5 negative things, notwithstanding the fact that we can all mock them mercilessly. And if so, what's the difference in the kind of political environment that leads to positive actions being rewarded by voters versus negative actions being rewarded by voters?
Okay. I guess the underlying question is, how do we future-proof? I think it's the concept of strategies that need to be in place for a long, long time, right? So that it's not just that you do them now, but then there's a change in government and things completely change track again. And for that, I think my earlier question was, so we need an inclusive work. So we need to make sure that it's not just some government officials that understand that this is the way we want to go, but and this was part of the conversation in the earlier panel, that we all want to go that way, right. And for that the conversation has to be inclusive.
And do you feel like, it sounds, sorry to interrupt you, but it feels like you think you've got that in Chile. You said we have the political will.
We have the political will. We have a law now that I think it is very important. It's much more difficult to scrap a law than than if it's just a policy, like a strategy. But of course, you require people to value this and hence see the value in the consequences of that law. I don't know, from the stuff that you said, actually the retrofitting, it's an important part of our law, and I think it has enormous benefits back in Chile, where the air pollution problem in the south is very severe because people burn wood, use fire to warm themselves. So by retrofitting, they would need less wood and hopefully also get rid of wood and use other ways of warming. So I think that's why it's so important to understand and see the synergies. Right. And when people feel that, then I agree that it makes it much more difficult to backtrack.
The other thing I guess I'd like to ask you is about, on this theme of designing future-proofed environmental policies and actions. So passing a law, yes, the incoming government can pass a different law or get rid of the law. In this country, we have, and last year we had the chair of the Climate Change Committee, which exists as a result of a law, but it is an institution with a whole lot of people working on the science and the advice. And I noted your 5th point was norms in institutions, which I think is smart. Where do you go here, or do you feel like you have the institutions such that if there were violent political swings in Chile, this agenda would last, or do you think you need to reinforce and build those institutions?
This is my job.
Yeah, okay. All right.
I need to make sure that the track that we think we need to be at is resilient to the political movements. And in that sense, so we have a principle in our laws, which is the non-regression principle. That's a very sort of, it's there, so it's really difficult. Once you've moved there, you cannot go back. You can go slower, you can go slightly sidewards, but you cannot go back. So our norms of, now I allow this level of pollution, the next time I will allow this, and next time I will allow this and this level of pollution.
Interesting. It sounds slightly Japanese, actually. I know they have a similar sort of program where you ratchet up and you never go back the other way. Just to be annoying, because that's kind of my job, isn't that anti-democratic, though? I mean, what if the voters decide they don't want to do this? They've gone too fast. Maisa was a scientist, but we want a comedian running the country, say, for instance, and they want to revert in the other direction. Isn't that their democratic will?
Well, I mean, I started my presentation saying that if we want a viable future, we have to tackle these 3 environmental challenges. And the viable future is not just for Maisa, it's for everyone on this planet, and not just for the human species, but for the livable part of the planet. And hence that non-regression principle is, I think, very central to environmental policy internationally, because we haven't probably recognized, or we started to recognize, 20, 50 years ago, that we were actually having this impact on the planet. And hence, I think, we should not backtrack there. We can go slower, but...
It's really interesting, because what I'm going to paraphrase what you've said. What I'm hearing is you don't just have duties to the people voting today. You've got duties to the future generations as well, future voters, and the task of government is to listen to voters today in a democracy, but not necessarily to do exactly what the majority of voters wants, or living voters, because you have a duty to non-voters, such as children below 18, and future people as well. So that's quite a, dare I say, sophisticated sense of the role of government and politicians.
And sorry, but I think also the human rights view. It's something that helps me and the government a lot as well in the policies that we are implementing.
Can I just check, when your mic's going off, can you hear Maisa at the back? Is it still okay? Okay, great, thank you. Just one other, well, maybe 2 other things before we open up to questions. I can't kind of help myself asking this either, but I want to talk to you about the scientific literacy of politicians in Chile, but also around the world, and your opposite numbers in different countries. And it's a slightly pointed question. My assumption is it's absolutely brilliant that we have someone with a doctorate of atmospheric physics in a ministerial position. Hallelujah, thank goodness. But I'm going to challenge myself and you in a way. The OECD study that I love referring to, that looked at the attitudes of 40,000 people across 20 countries on climate, showed that more science didn't help increase their commitment to action. What it showed was that people needed to understand how policies worked, that they worked, how they were going to affect them, and whether they harmed poor people. And if you could satisfy people on those 3 dimensions, you got massive increases of buy-in for climate change action, and giving them more science didn't move the needle. So I guess my question is, does it matter? Do you think it matters that you have a doctorate in atmospheric physics?
I mean, I guess I don't think it's necessary to have a doctorate in physics or even a doctorate to be an environmental minister. Is it positive in my case, in the case of Chile, or do I feel that I can make an extra contribution? I do actually think yes. And when they asked me this question when I was just being nominated, and I said, well, I know now, really, that of course when you make a decision, it's not just the evidence, that you have to take into account loads of different variables, and it's not just the physics part of it. And of course I've known this always, and now I'm experiencing what this actually means. But I would say in my case is, because this is such an urgent matter, it helps me. Maybe I'm just a stubborn person, but it helps me to keep focus on where we need to go, right? The north, I'm like, this is where we need to go, and I don't forget that. And then, of course, I know it's winding and it's not a straight line, but I can always remember others that there are a couple of things that we really need to do.
Wonderful. And my last question before we open up, and this is, again, slightly cheeky, and I hope you won't mind, but you said to me earlier that you're not a natural with the press, you have an inclination to speak the truth, to answer directly questions when asked. And some might think, hallelujah, this is what we need in politicians. But of course, this can get politicians into trouble. And I guess I'm just wondering whether you're surviving because there's a different media environment in Chile to the somewhat aggressive one we have here in the UK. It sounds like you don't think it's just as aggressive there. Okay. So how do you manage to get away with being truthful and informed and direct with the voters? Do they actually? I mean, there's a deeper question here. If we do treat voters like grown-ups, and if we just tell them the truth, is it possible that they might reward us at the ballot box? And are you living proof of that?
Well, I have survived to now. You never know. There's no big job security in this job. I mean, I don't know. What I have been trying to learn is something that I really liked when I was sitting in my living room looking at an interview to a politician is that that person sort of generally is at least trying to answer the question. And to see, when you see someone who's also reflecting on what is being answered, and okay, you can reflect on this, say something, and then move on to what exactly the messages you want to give. And I think that is fine. But completely like answering something completely different when it feels unrespectful. So I think that balance of answering, of reflecting on it shows that you actually care. I think that's the balance that you need.
I'm pretty sure we have a room full of people thinking, if only our politicians were like you. Anyway, that's, I mean, I have more, actually, but I'm going to open it up now and see what we have in the room. So let's start, goodness, 1, 2, 3. Start, and I'll take them. Actually, there's so many questions, I'm going to do bunches of 3 from the start. So 1, and then Steve, and then Susie, I think, yeah. So we have a microphone up the back. Yeah.
So, Maisa, listening to your vision of a socio-ecological just transition and a viable future, I interpret that as you saying that addressing a net zero transition and addressing inequality are allies. They're not foes. So I think that has huge implications for talent and economic empowerment and quality of life. So to build on Meta's point about skills and jobs and education, it would be great to understand from you what you see are the challenges for Chile with regard to that, skills and jobs and education. What is it doing and what do you think needs to be done?
Thanks very much, Ranjit, and sorry not to see you hiding behind the lectern there. Yep, thank you.
Okay, hi there. I am a senior researcher here in engineering and also a Chilean, so thank you for representing Chilean scientists, Minister. I had a question about Chile's constitution. I'm really excited because it's a new chapter for Chile to write the new rule book. And I wanted to know about your insights and your vision for how Chile protects its environment in that new constitution.
Okay, wonderful. Question on the constitution and environmental protection, yes.
Thank you very much for an inspirational keynote. My question is around how you reconcile the need for rapid action with the necessary slowness that's associated with bringing the public along with you, maintaining trust, and whether you had any strategies for how you are approaching that issue.
Fabulous. So 3 great questions. Environment and inequality, synergies, skills and jobs. How do we use the constitutional position, changing constitutional position to protect the environment, and the rapid action required versus the slowness of public trust. And I expect what you might get is some reflections and then a direct answer to those 3 questions.
Okay, yes, so
with respect to the first question, I do believe that we need to tackle that the environmental degradation that we are seeing, whose symptom we see as global warming, climate change, loss of biodiversity and pollution, are deeply rooted in a bad relationship, not just with nature, but with ourselves as well. And that produces societies that have high inequality. If we were more egalitarian, we would not allow to have sacrifice zones. We would not allow people living in very polluted areas. So they need to go together, and that's where the big opportunity is. And so if we do this right, we could do this wrongly, of course, as well. We could do it business as usual, but if we do it rightly, and here is where, at least at this moment in time, that I am sitting somewhere where we can make decisions. Okay, so we're going to do renewable energy. We're going to do green hydrogen. That green hydrogen should allow us to have skill development workers in Chile. So for example, when 10 years ago we started to have solar plants in Chile, we had to bring the workers from Europe that would even just install the panels, right? Because there were no skills on that. We have that now, but for example, we are not training students to do solar panels for housings. So they know now how to build a big sort of solar panel for electricity, but not on houses. So there's a lot of room to do that, and that requires, of course, planning ahead. Okay, I'm going to close down this coal-fired power plant, and what jobs I'm going to give them. So there is an enormous opportunity, and with this law, it obliges us to coordinate ourselves, and I'm really into coordination, so so I guess that's the answer. So we have the opportunity, and I'm going to make sure that at least while I'm there, we're going to harness that opportunity. The Constitution, well, that's a very long story about the Constitution. It would have been great to have a couple of important principles because this is going to help to future-proof as well. The process is still ongoing, so we don't entirely know now how it will end up, but hopefully we will have some importance, like the right for a clean environment in there, so that it can help us then to have the proper laws and the strategies, etc. And about the rapid action and the slowness of public trust, I would love to see everything that we managed to do with the pandemic, because I think in every country we learned how quickly we can adapt, how quickly we can completely change our way of living. Something that we normally think is slow, to change culture is slow. I think we have some examples to show that it's been able to be quickly done as well. And I think education there is crucial. And maybe just a little bit about the photo exhibition. I had never dived before becoming a minister, and I have been diving twice now. For some strange reason, I have never done it, and I have done it now. And
Was it part of the job, or did you just do it?
Yeah, no, part of the job.
It's quite a cool job.
It is, and I think it's so important that I actually see, and that we can all actually see the wonders there are underwater, in the forest, etc., in the mountains, in the sea. Because that's the only way, when you know something, you care about it and you can protect it. So that all part, I think it's very necessary to help us to protect and hence to make decisions that might need to, in your own behavior.
Well, I'm grappling with a horrible trade-off here because we have 1 minute left, but there were, 1, 2, 3 sort of hands. And Steve's already got his hand on the mic. Well, I guess I'd better let you ask your questions, Steve.
Oh, thank you. Steve Smith, I'm a researcher here at the Smith School and also a former atmospheric physicist. So I think we're all really intrigued by your unique background. And I was interested to hear your thoughts on the interface between research, physical science and social science, and the corridors of decision-making. Is there anything you would change? Do you think that works well? I mean, we've had international negotiations on climate for 30 years. We've had scientific reports landing on presidents' desks for almost 50 years now, and yet still the problem is far from fixed. So, I mean, some people lay that at the doors of, scientists not communicating well. Maybe you agree or disagree with that, but is there anything you would change in the structures that actually convey research findings to decision makers and also relay back to researchers what needs to be looked at?
Is that a pause for reflection, or would you like another one? All right. One more to give you time to think, and then we'd better wrap up.
Well, first off, thanks very much for your keynote and questions. I'm Jamie Crummy. I'm one of the founders of Too Good To Go. My question really comes back off the back of the Climate Action Summit in New York last week, when the president of Chile called out businesses for greenwashing, which I'm a big fan of. I really wanted to get your steer then on what you see Chile's role and responsibility is in pioneering climate action.
Great. So science and social science and the corridors of power, and Chile's role in promoting climate action. And actually, I'm going to cheekily add one more. I think it was Jean-Claude Juncker who said, we all know what we need to do when we're in power. We just don't know how to get re-elected after we've done it. And I'd be interested in your reflections on whether you're worried about being re-elected or you're just doing what you think you should do. But anyway, start with Steve and Jeremy's questions.
No, that's very easy because I wasn't elected. So back in Chile, it's the president who appoints the minister. So I have never been. I have never been in a, and that's definitely something I could not do. I think, to be in a campaign.
But you won't have to campaign with your president in the next election?
No, because there's no re-election in Chile.
Oh, okay.
But so maybe campaign for
read the textbook.
Yeah, no, it's...
Excuse me. All right, we'll move swiftly on and answer Steve's question.
The role of Chile in pioneering climate action, I really like that question because my answer to that is, of course, there are countries that have a lot more of a mission, lots more responsibility, capacity, etc. But if a small country, developing, with loads of issues, shows that it can be done, then I think that's a very, very important example for the 150 countries there are around the world that are probably in a similar situation than we are. So I think that's my answer to when sometimes people say, but our emissions are, it's 0.3% of the global emissions. Why should we be worrying about mitigation? I think because it's going to help us for good development, and we can showcase that this can be done, and I think that is very, very important. With respect to the science policy interface, that's my lifetime question. You didn't mention this, but I was a IPCC author as well, coordinating lead author, and so I have, I guess, moved from atmospheric physics into the science policy for quite a while now, and I was in the former government scientific advisor as well, sort of the equivalent to the Climate Change Committee in the UK. So basically, I was there providing the evidence, learning how to provide the evidence so that policymakers could use it, to completely move to the other side, to actually using the science policy, sort of bridging this. And maybe we can have a conversation.
Yes, well, you probably should. You probably should,
because it's long.
Especially because we are over time. But I think everybody will, delight in joining me in saying thank you, Maisa.